better never ends. In health, in performance, no matter your starting point, you can always strive for better. My name's Charlie Goodchild, I'm your host, and this is the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, and inspiring you to discover yours.
Today's guest is Dan O'Neill. Dan's a PT. He works here at Until alongside me, doing his own thing, just getting his clients, training in the gym, working out, living a better life. And the thing that grabbed my attention is that Dan just seems to do things a little different to most PTs that I've worked with. I've spent a lot of time working alongside coaches and PTs in my career, and some of the conversations I've had with Dan have just grabbed my attention. So today's conversation is really I think he's in the top end of PT. So what does a top end PT do differently to an average PT perhaps? And hopefully this is a conversation that engages both the PT world, so other personal trainers out there, as well as individuals who maybe want to just upgrade their life and maybe make some changes in their own lives as well. So Dan, I'll introduce you now, bring you into the conversation, and hopefully you can give everyone a bit of an understanding as to what I mean by something a bit different in the PT world. But tell us the long version of what brought you into the world of PT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, thanks for having me. Very kind introduction. I guess I've never not wanted to, some people find their own journey into fitness. I think I've always thought of myself as a coach, even when the age of 18 and I I wanted to play professional rugby, and I'd always be like, well, why don't we try this drill? Or why don't we, I remember challenging the coaches or challenging my friends when we do a drill and go, why don't we do it this way? So I was always trying to think of like, how do I become the best version of myself? Or I just wanted to win. I always wanted to win.
Okay.
I'm competitive, I guess. Yeah. So I guess that's the initial start to that. I guess like most people now, went to university and did the exercise science sort of pathway, but from there it was all about seeking out mentors, seeking out who's the best in the field, and then like try to like absorb loads of knowledge from them by, if you remember, there was infinite T Nation articles, and there was lots of Paul Chek or Charles Poliquin articles. They were the two kind of key figures initially. One, obviously, Poliquin being very strength coach oriented, working with lots of Olympic athletes. And I somehow found myself in that world of Paul Chek as well, who was very health holistic. So slightly different end of the spectrum, but they're both in great shape. They're both trained, really fit, strong, healthy people. So they were kind of my two first barometers or reference points to what does it look like to be at the top end of the industry, even though they were both from different perspectives. And so I think it was immersing myself in both for those sort of fields and just bringing it together.
So that's your model then. You've kind of taken two leaders in slightly different worlds and tried to combine them with your own little spin on things. Is that roughly where it's ended up being?
I think, like I said, even at the start, like I've always been obsessed with how do you take performance to another level? And then it was just realizing, I think I realized quite early on the connection between health is that limiting factor to being amazing at your sport, right? Whether that's longevity or whether that's trying to get that extra 2% to take someone to the Olympics, to a professional level, there's a deep connection between them both. Mm-hmm. And I feel like people are like certainly understanding that conversation more now, but certainly 10 years ago, they were one and two different things. You were a strength conditioning coach or you're a hippie health coach.
Yeah.
They weren't married up.
The interesting thing as well is people in their 20s are either in or approaching their prime competitively in the performance world. So in some ways they can probably get away with not being perfectly healthy. So they don't necessarily have to always do these things. They don't necessarily have to always do these things to perform at a pretty high level. But even then, some of the stuff I'm aware of is that when they sleep better, when they eat better, they get better results again. They get injured less and all these things. So even at the highest of level with people who are overtly healthy, it still matters as to whether they are living a better life in terms of those fundamental parts of lifestyle.
When you're 20, you're invincible, right? You get injured, you bounce back next week.
Yeah.
You know, we're not that old, but I can certainly feel the difference. If I get injured, it takes me slightly longer to bounce back from that. But I know if sleep's dialed in, I recover better. I know if I eat well and don't go out and, if you get an injury, don't go out and booze, I know I'm going to recover quicker.
Yeah. I
know all these things, they matter.
So then if you came from this performance world, what was the thing that changed into becoming more of a general population type coach?
So from a sporting perspective, I've worked in and around sport from rugby league back in Australia, basketball with the University of Florida, did an internship out there, Millwall football, the 18 Academy, and then also went over to China and worked with the women's Olympic rowing team. So sport was always where I wanted to be. Then there's for me there was, do I want to have a stable setting? Do I want to have a relationship, or do I want to live that kind of single life, traveling and working with team sport? And for me, the long distance stuff, it was tough. And I wanted to be stable. I wanted to earn more money and be in control of my destiny a little bit more, rather than being slightly at the mercy of a team or a coach or a system. I kind of wanted just to, I guess, create my own journey, my own system.
Yeah, well, do you have a relationship with your career, or do you have a relationship with another person, like a loved one? That's probably where it boils down to. And I had this conversation with Nick Garcia, who is on one of our earlier episodes talking about running, and he was also a similar situation where he's a bit like me as well, wanting to be a coach or a physio, my part in sport, and then realizing that it didn't quite fit with his values, my values, and by the sounds of it, your values, and you made a judgment call to shift and focus on general population instead.
And I think that's where it's not that you can't use your skill set and marry those two concepts up, right? My tagline that I like to use is I train 9 to 5s to look and feel like athletes. And I think there's a place for that, because at every stage, people move beyond their peak, whether they're a competitive or a semi-professional or just a social athlete. I still think people want to achieve, get a win. They want to be immersed in sport in some way, right? And so whether they can get that kick out of having a win in the gym, how many social athletes or Sunday warriors do you see now entering park runs, entering turf games, entering Tough Mudders, endless sort of fitness competitions now. And I think that's High Rocks. It's a really safe way for people to get that fix of feeling like an athlete without committing to a full-time sport. And that's just absolutely booming.
Well, also the life we live in the Western world now is stressful. We do have a lot of stuff that makes us feel quite stressed, and it goes beyond our ability to cope quite often. And we know exercise is an outlet for that stress, and competitive sport in particular can feel like war and feel like, the thing that our adrenaline system is designed to do. So you can see why it's going that way, why people are becoming more engaged in these slightly more warfare-like sports or events, because it is competitive. And, male or female, we seem to be getting something from that, and there's got to be an element of almost an outlet of stress.
And I'm a big believer in we need to. Quite often you see people that they might work in a job, for example, and they move and they shift on every 2 to 3 years, right? And it either happens when they're not valued or they don't see growth. And I think if that sort of situation's going on that side of the fence, if you can come and regularly get a win in the gym, regularly get a win in your 10K, your half marathon, I think people take a lot of personal value out of those wins. And I think fitness has absolutely boomed in the last, 10, 15 years, where I wouldn't say the average price tag is what it is now. And I wouldn't think the amount of personal trainers in the industry has probably quadrupled. So the value in health is massive now.
So yeah, I'd say even since COVID that's gone up again. Yeah. People are valuing their health in another way altogether. So then what do you find works best? What's your model? Tell us about your model for helping a 9 to 5 feel like an athlete. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that all starts from the intake and getting a thorough overview of, like I said, I believe health is the bedrock to them ultimately getting success. So that's having an intake on understanding their sleep, their stress, their energy, their digestion, their nutrition, as well as like a physical movement screen as well, just to get like a pretty comprehensive idea of what are the areas that we can help, that I can help with, right? And I believe people come to coaches because they probably have a vague idea, but they don't know how to make it work. They might have a vague idea of how to train, but they don't know how to make it fit into their lifestyle. So how do you create order out of chaos? I think ultimately that's what people are coming for. How do they fit a training schedule into their busy life? And I think it's ultimately that's where in our world, working with, city workers, corporate workers, they're busy, they're time poor, and they want something that's simple and effective. So how can you help them establish healthy eating patterns, make sure they're getting enough movement in, train, sleep, supplements? And I think that's ultimately where the results come from.
And I think if you ask most of these people who are moderately intelligent, at the very least, from the people that you're talking about there, if you said to them, what are the important things for you to be healthy? They'll say, I need to sleep better, I need to eat better, I need to train, I need to move my body, I need to manage my stress. They'll say those things. It's not like they don't know that these are the things, but what they're struggling with is, how do I prioritize them in the right way? And what are the decisions I need to make in order to make it fit and stick? So there was a lovely metaphor one of my patients said to me the other day. She was having a similar dilemma, and she said, it feels like I'm juggling loads of balls. Some of the balls are made of glass and some of them are made of plastic. And I don't know which ones I can drop safely. She's like, and that was essentially the conversation we had.
Yeah.
So we had a discussion about which ones do we decide are plastic and then we can drop and stop juggling. Which ones are glass and we're going to have to keep juggling them because they're just going to smash.
And I've done this exercise with clients as well, where you write down the things that are important to you, and you give them a percentage, or you put them into a pie chart. And like, if you're struggling to fit in how to do your food prep or struggling to fit in training, let's like actually look at your week and see where you've been effective. Because quite often there's a big part of the chart that might be social time or going out with mates or Netflix or whatever that is, but it doesn't align with their values. So is their time spent well aligned to their values? And normally once they can see it on paper, they go, well, I just need to prioritize things a little bit better. I think that ultimately, like, that will help with those foundational structures that we're talking about. How do we be more efficient through the week?
Why are values important?
If people gain confidence by following through with what they say they will do, and also living by their values, I think when people are looking for confidence, those things are incongruent. If you don't do what you say you'll do, or you don't live by the things that you actually believe in, whether that's health is a priority, whether my family is priority, whether religion is a priority, if you don't actually practice that I think that's where you have that deep feeling of unsatisfaction or incongruency.
And that probably feels like chaos for some people.
And that's ultimately where it is, right? When they say that health's important to them, but they're out on Saturday night till 3 a.m. That,
Yeah. Because it's probably spending time with friends is probably also important, isn't it? But then it's trying to understand for that person, is the out till 3 a.m. because you want to spend time with your friends, or are you numbing some sort of stress or pain that's in your life that you don't know how to fix?
The fear of missing out is obviously a big one.
Yeah.
And how I think everyone you speak to will say, I'm tired and I'm stressed. And I think ironically the answer to that, in short, is that they don't have enough quiet time or alone time, because everyone will fill the gap with scrolling on their phone. And I feel like without giving your mind the time to process and have that subconscious space, you can't compartmentalize the day. And so your brain's always thinking, and then we go into nighttime and It's like, well, I can't switch off now because I'm trying to solve all the problems. And I think we make ourselves busier than we actually need to be.
Yeah, I'm too busy. It's a very common one. I'm too busy. Yeah. So with those people, with the people who say to you, I'm too busy, how do you help them make some different choices in their life?
As you know, being a parent, there's busy, and then there's another level of being busy, right? Where you're literally scratching around for minutes and time in the day. I think we had this chat a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about when we're in a routine, circadian rhythms, meal timing being the same, training timing being the same, sleep being the same. When those things are lined up, those sleep-wake cycles become more regulated, so people can fall asleep at a similar time and they don't struggle to wake up. They can sort of wake up at that regular time. So for them, it's routine, as mundane or boring as that may seem. It's almost the freedom that people are looking for. They're always tired, or they're always struggling with something, but what they're really seeking is how to gain control back, and that comes from routine, that comes from structure, and putting all those things in little boxes.
Yeah, the insight I got relatively early on, actually, from wearing a Whoop. It measures a lot of things, the Whoop, and we might come to some of those in a minute. But one of the things is that it's looking at heart rate variability, so how variable your heart rate is, and a high heart rate variability is a sign of a good functioning nervous system. Low heart rate variability is not coping. And I found one of the most predictable ways of my heart rate variability being low, so not in a good place, was not having a consistent wake and sleep time.
Yep.
And it was the one thing that surprised me more than anything else. Like, I knew alcohol was bad for me. So I knew when I would drink, my heart rate variability would be bad. And it was. I mean, that is still the biggest one. And I knew not getting enough sleep would be bad for me. And it is. But the one I didn't know would be so predictive was that consistent sleep and wake time. So that really surprised me, actually. I'd heard of it and I knew it was a thing, but sometimes you hear it's a thing and you kind of don't really feel it in your body. But this was one where the data was quite conclusive in the end. It's like, okay.
And, you sort of tie it back to professional sport, the more systemized and regimented things are, the more predictable the next day becomes. And you can really hone in on, the expectation of what they can achieve the next day. When things are so chaotic and different, like eating at different times, waking at different times, training at different times, it's very hard when someone comes with a complaint to pinpoint where it's going wrong. And so when they're struggling with energy, sleep, stress, digestion, all those things, it's like let's narrow things down and simplify things, and then it becomes really easy to find the problem. When there's so many variables, it's really hard to go, that's it, that's your fix.
Yeah.
We can't just take a supplement and wish it away.
I genuinely believe this is why there's a home and an away disadvantage, because there is that routine and automation that comes with being in your home environment, and that everything is familiar, everything you know where it is. You go to an away environment, you're the same athlete, you've got the same level of ability, you've got all of the support around you in order to optimize things. But for some reason, there is still, across all sports, there is still a home and away advantage. And that must be something to do with this slightly out of control factor.
So really interesting. Joel Jamieson's someone that I also really look up to, and amazing in the world of health, longevity, heart rate variability, training elite athletes, endurance athletes, etc. And learning from him, one of the best ways to he has like a 4-quadrant model, and he talks about its mental, physical, emotional, and physical preparation. And if you're going into a competition, it's not just enough to train for the competition. You have to expose yourself to all the elements. If you're training at 12 o'clock, but you're competing at 8 o'clock, you've set yourself up for a different, I guess, energy or circadian rhythm or energy pattern. What's the temperature going to be like? What's the light going to be like? What's the noise going to be like? What sort of clothing you're going to be wearing? Is your nutrition going to be the same? All those little things is going to be the difference between you feeling prepared and calm or stressed, right? Because as soon as stress raises, we change our not only your ability to solve problems, you also change your energy utilization. So you go from burning fat, you're in control, you've got loads of stored energy, you're full of energy. But if you immediately raise cortisol before the competition's even started, for example, you're tapping into your glucose, your stored glucose stores straight away. Glucose is where we get all our energy, our power, isn't it? So by being exposed to those sort of environments or exposed to those elements, we can reduce that sort of anxiety or that stress exposure.
Yeah, or at least just have your body in a state that it knows that this is what it's going to feel like. And this even, I've had this before. I do a lot of my training now in the evening because that's just when my kids go to sleep. So they go to sleep at 7:30, so I can then train from 8 till 9, 9:30. So I do a lot of my training in the evenings now, but a lot of events that I do are in the morning. Mm-hmm. So I get to the morning and I have to figure out what my nutrition's going to be like, and I don't tend to eat that much in the morning, so then I've got to force myself to eat. So I don't tend to feel that great starting off on a half marathon or whatever, just because it's not how I normally feel when I'm about to start. So what am I going to do? Like, that doesn't really fit. I can't train in the mornings. It doesn't work. But what I've started to realize is in the few weeks before, I have started to do this. I'm not even sure if it's conscious or not. The few weeks before, I will make sure I train a few times in the mornings just to get my body some kind of prepared for that.
It just takes me back. I had a client who's a semi-professional footballer, and he kept saying that he played at 3 p.m. and he always felt tired and he always felt sluggish right before kickoff. And he's like, well, what's wrong? Like, is it my sleep? Is it my training? I feel like it's all dialed in. And we just had this conversation. What are you doing Monday to Friday at 3 o'clock every day? He said, I'm sat at my desk, I'm slumped over, I'm like trying to get through the day, because he was obviously working part-time as well. Yeah. And so we just shifted things up, and I said, why don't you, at 3 o'clock or at 10 to 3 every day, you've got to do 3 sets of 10 push-ups and 3 sets of 10 squat jumps, just to like send that sort of energy regulation up every single day. 3 o'clock, bang, 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 bang. And he's like, man, you wouldn't believe it. I feel so energized at 3 o'clock now.
I don't think we give that kind of stuff enough credit. We're aware of jet lag. We're aware of what that feels like. We're aware of, feeling a little different throughout the day, and some people being morning people, some people being evening people. But I don't know if we've quite got to that granular level of being that specific. And it's such a good point because that weekend warrior who can still be super competitive because they probably are in their life and in their job. Like, why wouldn't they want to be super competitive and set PBs and do all these things? And are they thinking like that? Like, elite athletes have an entire career based on optimizing things, but a weekend warrior wouldn't have thought of it that way. But it's a relatively simple shift for most people. If they've just got even the smallest level of autonomy in their job, they might be able to mix things up a little bit and train at those times, right?
Yeah. Sometimes those are the simplest things, but sometimes people just need their handheld to actually make those things a reality, or they need the accountability as well. Otherwise, we basically repeat 70, 80, 90% of our daily behaviors every single day. We get up, you brush your teeth, you get the tube to work, you work roughly the same hours, go home, give the kids a cuddle, put them to bed, and rinse and repeat. So to break cycles is actually a bit challenging, and that people need their hand held, or they just need to be coached through to make those changes. I think that's where our input really helps with clients, because sometimes it's not groundbreaking, but they can't do it themselves.
It also often takes being able to step back and out of the emotion of it in order to see it. Because if a lot of the time you ask them to advise their best mate on the situation, they've probably got the answer in there somewhere, and it's just harder for them to advise themselves or see it clearly through their own lens. What are some of the other things that you would be typically looking for in that initial consultation or in those initial few sessions? What other things are you measuring or asking about that are common in your clientele?
So So there's the obvious sort of subjective data, and then the deeper layer stuff would be more hard objective data, right? So that could be using a Whoop, getting their heart rate variability. That's a real obvious one that I try to get with clients. Morning heart rate, resting heart rate in the morning, heart rate variability, blood pressure. I also encourage clients to get a full panel blood test done as well. Purely not for any reason of diagnosing any disease. It's just to optimize health and performance, because if any markers are low, that could be a limiting factor to us getting optimal body composition or training results. So it's really cool to just, I like people to also get that once every 12 months as well. It's a really good baseline. Hey, we don't want to get to the point where you're unwell, right? So it's really good just to have that as a prerequisite. In terms of on the gym floor, again, depending on who comes in the door, like if they're interested in running or any athletic sport, then I like to use the VALD equipment.
So the force plates.
Yeah, force plates. Yeah, so anything like a isometric mid-thigh pull or isometric squat into pins, those sort of drills, exercises are really good because they're really safe, right? It's really easy to get a maximum representation of how much force someone can exert without injuring them, rather than using a 1RM or a 3RM deadlift, squat example. So we can still understand how much force they can express through a particular movement pattern or a particular limb without risking them to any sort of danger. And then if someone's more in line with running, a running sport, I like to use things like squat jump and counter movement jump to get a base line idea on their force velocity profile. So ideally you like to have that sort of 10% gap between what a static jump and a reactive elastic counter movement jump would be. If you see that difference, you might go, okay, let's tailor slightly towards more elastic work, jumps, throws, bounds, all those sort of things. Or if the gap's really narrow, also like, okay, let's work on the maximum strength.
Is this the dynamic strength index concept? Is that roughly that, where you're comparing power and strength and the difference between the two in two different tests?
Yes, so. And there's loads of ways to do that. You can use the velocity bands, and you can put a load on and see at what speed they're exerting 100 kilos versus 110 kilos. And that's a really easy way to do it. The jump profiling is again, just another safe and really simple, quick way to do it.
Yeah.
I like to use that. It's just really simple and effective.
What other metrics do you then use to then retest or use to guide your own coaching through some of these tests?
So in terms of, again, let's sort of use like a runner, for example, like to use a hop test, so left to right. So we can obviously, more often than not, it's addressing left to right imbalance. Mm-hmm. I generally don't care too much, other than maybe a mid-thigh pull, kind of what level of strength someone can produce. Because at the end of the day, we're going to improve that anyway.
So baseline tests.
It's just baseline for that. But left to right, I find obviously very important, right? Because we need to know that sort of stuff straight away, because that can dictate the volume or the reps or the exercise selection.
Yeah.
But in terms of absolute numbers, I don't really care all that much. Because at the end of the day, I know they're going to... I just want to have it so they can reflect upon it.
Yeah.
So they can go, yeah. Because people love to see a win.
Exactly.
They love it.
This is why I love the numbers.
It's great. And I think that clients will take a lot of value from knowing that you have a plan for them. And so if you can say, let's just use chin-ups, for example. If you can say you can do 5 bodyweight chin-ups, but in 6 weeks' time, I know you can do a weighted 15 kilos, that they get excited about that, because they know you've pre-thought and you've got a plan and a path for them.
I think normative data works well here too. You can say, with whatever test you're going to use, you say, well, people your age typically can score this, and you're scoring this. And if it's lower, you can go, well, look, probably got a bit of work to do. And they go, yeah, actually. And people who are competitive, that works really well. Not everyone is, by the way. You know, like, you are competitive. You said that right from the beginning. You want to win, and you probably attract clients who have that similar mentality. And I'm the same, to be honest. And I get that mentality as well. So when I'm setting people a challenge and using normative data, I'm trying to spark a fire in them to go, I've got to actually get this going. I've got to start doing some more, especially for my clientele. People don't always come to me knowing that that's where we're going to go. They sometimes come to me thinking they're going to be fixed by some kind of magic treatment I might do. Whereas actually in my head, most people, I'm thinking, I wonder how I can engage them in a different type of exercise. Because in my head, one of the reasons they're injured is because they've not been exercising very well, and they've not got a structure. They've not got any order and these things. So it's slightly different for me. I'm really thinking of numbers as a behavior change motivator. You probably already got people in there wanting to change. You've just got to drip feed a few little bits in here and there and make sure that they do see the results in the end, right? Which equally powerful, but a slightly different application by the sounds of it.
And it's when they can, you know, some people aren't that excited about gym numbers, but when they can see that they've run a faster time, then that's when they get excited about it. So I think the biggest thing, my suggestion for a younger coach would be, you've got to collect data. You've got to show your clients that you care and that they can see progress.
Yeah. The probably one of my favorite sayings, that maybe this is the 10th time I've said it on here. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And all of the good practitioners seem to have an element of that. They understand the importance of empathy and being able to connect with people before they can really start work on their actual job. You know, the training, the coaching, you've got to connect first.
And like, I'm all for people having boundaries from their clients. However, I personally felt there's a strong correlation with your communication with them outside of the hours that you're working with them. And particularly if you only see someone once a week, there has to be a message dropped in there at some point during the week. And that can be how you're recovering, how's your food, how's your training session, or how's your mum. Like, whatever that is, if you need to be in their mind, right? Because the old saying, we're the byproduct of the 5 closest people that were around, right? And if you're not constantly sort of tapping into that in some way, they don't feel the care and the love that you're talking about, and they've got too much going on that sometimes those things are. I think we're so deeply entrenched in health, particularly in this environment, that we think about it all the time. Training, food, we're thinking about it all the time. But the people that we work with, they're not. They're thinking about work, money, family, logistics. And it's the more you can sort of slowly bleed that into their day and their week, it starts to like help them make those changes.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with communicating with my patients outside of the session, because not everyone wants it or needs it, but the ones that do really respond well to it, I'm happy to give those few seconds of my time. I seem to have a fairly good ability to kind of switch on and off quite quickly. So I can send a message, okay, it's gone. It doesn't linger with me very often. Every now and again, a difficult case or a difficult client might hang around in my head a bit too long, and that's not so good for me, but it doesn't really happen that often. So I'm quite comfortable with answering messages outside of my work hours, and ultimately, look, that's why people are paying me a bit more than the average physio. That's why people are paying you a bit more than the average PT, because you're going to give more of your time, and your time is what you're selling. So I think that's part and parcel of it. And for the ones who, I really like that, what you just mentioned there about, for us, it's obvious health is a big part of our lives, therefore we think about it more. For those who that's not the case, we perhaps need to coach them towards that, and by just nudging them every now and again, you're helping them towards that mentality.
And that can be, you know, you sending them videos, you sending them articles, you tagging them in an Instagram video, whatever that is. Just the more you drip feed that and start to become more of their conscious thoughts every day. Yeah. You know, like I said, I think people act and think very similar thoughts and do similar things on repeat.
Yeah.
Simplicity, less effort involved, whatever it is. Once they start to, you have to help someone change the cycle.
Yeah. And that's hard because cycles have probably been built over many years, sometimes decades. And unlearning a habit is essentially impossible, but you have to train them a new habit to replace the old one. So that's what you're getting at, really, is like the more times you can reinforce the new habit, the better.
The more times you can, expose them, the better. And we're very primitive creatures, right? And so we stick to our herd. And what does our herd do or represent? What are the behaviors that they exemplify? And if you're, someone's tribe, they're drinkers, they're smokers, they're not exercisers, it's like a thermostat. They can take the steps forward and they come back. They take a step forward and they always come back to where, because that's where they feel safe in their herd. And so sometimes those slow conversations take time to make them, feel safe in your environment or bringing them into your world. Because I'm a big believer, we're primitive and we're primed to think, I'm safe. I can read all these things, but at the end of the day, I feel safe with my best friends or I feel safe with my family. So I'm going to act, and I don't want to act out because they're going to call me out. And I don't like it when they don't love me because it feels unsafe. So that's a challenge in itself to help people rewire that hardware in their brain.
This is right on the heart of behavior change for a huge chunk of people, because they, like we said earlier, most people know the right things to do. They know how to be healthy roughly, but they don't feel able to. They don't quite have the environment. That's such an important part of this here, because I can think of a client in particular who was so motivated to make change. He was so determined to improve his overall health, but all his mates were from the pub. All his mates were boozers. They drink down the pub, and that was his main circle of trust. And we'd gone quite deep into this journey for this particular person about what he was going to do and how he was going to change. And he'd even relocated for a period of time in order to make these changes. And ultimately what it came down to was that when he went back to his environment, his friends were still there and his behavior was still to go and see his friends down the pub, which then involved drinking. And we said to him, like, are you going to tell your friends about the journey you've been on in the last few months? And he said, I don't think I can. He said, I don't know if I could do that. Like, even though he was so determined and so invested a huge amount of his heart and his money as well into making these changes, he still couldn't quite get over this connection to his herd, that wasn't how his herd behaved, and that he didn't want to be an outsider.
And I think we all are guilty of getting in our own way through fear of failure, fear of missing out, fear of rejection, fear of not being accepted in the herd. And ultimately that, having those conversations, letting people know that they're making these changes for the right reason. I need your support on this. Can you understand why I'm making these changes? It's for me, it's for my health, it's for all the right reasons. Sometimes that can be the barrier between them actually getting results. Yeah,
because this guy had his whole family behind him. So it wasn't that his loved ones were behind him. He had his whole family behind it, and they all knew. But it was his friends. So that for some people, you have to be able to tell your friends as well. Otherwise, it'll derail on that level. I've taken this year. I've decided to drink less. I'm not drinking. Probably about once a month, I'll still have a drink. That's probably what it's averaged in 2024. But I've made a bit of a conscious choice to drink less often. If I'm going to preach about health, I need to be able to look at my Whoop data, see what it's telling me, and start thinking about making some behavior changes. And I'd probably drink once a week, I would say, on average. And so to drink once a month, that is a significant shift. It hasn't been that hard, but the big reason it hasn't been that hard is because the first time I was out with my friends this year, I said to them, I'm not drinking tonight. I'm just gonna drink alcohol-free beers, I think, instead. And we had a big conversation about it, and a few people were really interested by it. A couple of people were confused by it, but it went fine. Ultimately, it was all right. And it wasn't quite the same kind of night as I would normally have, but I woke up the next day, felt great, went for a run, and in the end felt like that was reward enough for me to go, that worked out, that was really good. But now I've done it a few times, and increasingly it's becoming fine. And it's not, and I've still been out with my friends and had a drink as well. So I think it's kind of teetering on this decision about whether I drink or not in the future. And I think at the moment I'm at a really good level of every now and again I will, but most of the time I won't, and that feels great. But it's because I involve my friends that I believe that it's been a bit easier for me to make that change.
Environments become habitual as well, right? So when we go to the pub, and naturally we just think, I'm just going to have a drink, and it's we don't really I guess think about that, and that can happen in environments here. Making the connection to clients might have 5 coffees a day, and they have it when they wake up, when they get into work, when they go out with their mate for their smoke break, right? And sometimes, like, you almost need to, like, I guess, pull back and like look at the situation for what it is. Do I actually need that coffee, or do I actually need that beer, or is it just because I'm in a social situation? Am I just in a situation that it's habitual?
The old classical conditioning, the kind of Pavlov's dog thing, whenever the kind of feeding the dog with the bell, you ring the bell, you feed the dog, and then in the end, all they needed was the bell, and the dog starts salivating. It used to be the food, and then it's just the bell. So you associate. It's the same. You associate the pub with a drink, and I think that's why non-alcohol. Now the fact that alcohol-free beer is got a bit tastier, I can go and have an alcohol-free beer, and it's just a tiny bit less different. It's not quite so massively contrasted. I can still feel like I'm having a beer. It just doesn't have alcohol in it. So there's probably something in that as well.
And I don't think the stigma is as bad as it once was.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
I think, I've definitely been out on nights out, and my mates have said I'm having alcohol-free beer, and that's like, no one's made any judgment. But then again, it's also your wiring, right? Like, if I was to go back into my hometown, it's a hard-working farm town. There's mines. You play rugby. It's a very masculine environment. You go to the pub. You say you're not going to have a beer, and you'll get some shit for it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So again, that sometimes, like, I do understand
the environment.
That's the environment, and that peer pressure can be a bit extreme. But I find it great here in London. I think people are more accepting of that, right?
Yeah. The other part here about behaviour change, and I had this conversation with a client the other day about you can be really motivated to do something, and you can, in that period of motivation, you can make some pretty tough choices and make big shifts. But if you don't reward that behaviour in one way or another, you've got less chance of it sticking, because ultimately, again, like you've said about the primitive brain, it is still there, and we might not be quite aware of it, but we sometimes need to reward the behaviour in one way or another. And for some people, they get intrinsic reward from, we've mentioned numbers, improvements in run times, or increases in muscle size, or something that we either feel or see. But other times we need a different type of reward. And for this particular case, we were talking about making a change to her morning routine in order to manage stress, because she quite astutely picked out the first thing she does when she wakes up, she looks at her phone. That seems to trigger this stress response immediately. She's got a lot going on in work, and that was causing an effect on her tension in her body and some pain and some suffering that she had. So we spent a big chunk of the session redesigning her morning. I said, well, what are you going to do at the end of the week in order to go, big pat on the back, well done. Yeah. She was like, I don't know. And I was like, well, what do you love? What do you really love? She's like, God, I love a donut. It's like, well, why don't you treat yourself to a donut on a Saturday? If you get 5 out of 5, Monday to Friday, you get the morning routine. She was like, oh no, I can't, because I'm also trying to manage my weight and do all these stuff. It's like, well, one donut. Why don't you power walk to the donut place? You've got to find some way of doing it and rewarding yourself, because otherwise you're going to resent all this stuff, and you haven't got this way of classically conditioning your system to actually want to do this slightly more challenging morning routine.
Yeah, and I find like sometimes clients can come in with all the energy and motivation in the world to make changes, and they want to change 21 different things. And the reality is it's very hard to do that, and it's very hard to be able to repeat and make that habitual approach. So very often if someone, they tick those boxes, they might do their training session, they might do their steps. If anything, I like to encourage them to have something else post dinner. So whether that's some dark chocolate, whether that's something small, manageable, not out of control, but providing a sense of also normality. Because I think, again, we've got there's a bandwidth of where we can make change and we can accept that change. I think if we jump too far out of the normal, whenever things get stressful, we just default back to old patterns. And so if there can be small, gradual changes, it's more likely to be a lifestyle. And I think what I try to encourage with my clients is, and unfortunately I do have good retention with my clients, but I always say to them at the start is that if you were to leave after 12 weeks, I want you to be able to take all this information and run with it and not need to be with me or with someone else again, because you've learnt the fundamental behaviors that help you get long-term success. And it's just slowly tweaking in those lifestyle changes.
What are some of the nutritional lifestyle changes that you might be encouraging for your clients?
Yeah. So the two big ones, three big ones, people are obviously trying to get optimal body composition. They need to have an awareness around calories. I'm not a big proponent on counting calories over the long haul. I like them to understand the concept of what energy is. But I don't like people always trying to be counting the calories and then trying to burn off X amount of calories, because it's always like the mentality is I've got something to lose. There's something not right with me and I have something to lose. I like to focus on giving clients wins, and results come from hard work, hard effort, good routines. So from a nutritional point of view, using protein as the foundation of trying to get a minimum standard of 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight. Using that divided by 3 to 4 meals a day. Break that up. There's endless benefits to protein. Particularly what I like it for is, outside of building lean muscle mass, is helping balance blood sugar, because I find when clients have irregular blood sugar management or control, that's when they become more moody, more irritable, they crave more foods, and the backlash of that is all these erratic behaviors. I need another coffee, I need a sweet fix, I need the croissant. And what goes up sort of comes down. So if we feed that with sugar and caffeine, we get the spike, but then it shoots back down, and then the roller coaster continues. And so people that struggle with energy throughout the day, that constantly have energy slumps, the protein is the bedrock to helping balance blood sugar. So that's initially where I start. And then it's 95% of clients don't have enough fiber and don't have enough potassium. They pretty well go hand in hand. If you've got enough fiber, you've got enough potassium in your diet. But they help with fluid regulation. The potassium sodium balance helps with fluid regulation. So, example, I had a client that would eat well Monday to Friday, but he would always sort of binge and have the pizza, high sodium, really low potassium foods. And he would, you could see his weight go down from Monday to Friday, and then it would balloon back up because he was retenting all that water from a high sodium diet. It wasn't until I learned about the benefits of potassium and fiber and how that helps you regulate, I guess, the fluid side of things. Because sometimes improving body composition, while it is dropping body fat and increasing lean muscle mass, it's that sort of bloated or that water retention puffiness that sometimes people are trying to get rid of, that they don't associate is not it's not just body fat. It's the quality of the nutrition.
Yeah. It's like that systemic inflammation.
The systemic inflammation
Yeah, which
that resides,
is also not
sits, yeah, which we know contributes to lots of diseases down the line. But purely from a body composition point of view, they're the two bedrocks.
Yeah.
Sufficient regular protein and fiber. And even from breakfast, I think I like personally that people start the day with a protein-rich breakfast and fiber as well.
Yeah, the two ends of your cellular membranes, the way you bring water in and get water out is regulated through potassium and sodium. And I'm not sure I'd even remembered that until you just connected it for me there. That's the way our body optimally shifts water from one cell to another and therefore regulates it in a way that keeps us healthy. So we're not short of salt mostly. Although actually I've heard some people quite convincingly argue that in our quest for health, a lot of people are actually under-consuming, so some people are under-consuming salts because we're trying to eradicate it altogether. It's kind of optimally consuming salt is the important thing, and sodium. But that's a nice reminder about potassium. And so how would someone get potassium? You said that providing they're getting enough fiber, they're almost certainly going to get it. But
they tend to work hand in hand. So, from a fiber perspective, again, this is body weight dependent, but, roughly women plus 25 grams a day and guys 30 to 35 grams a day. And then hand in hand, you should be hitting that potassium ballpark figure. Anything that's like leafy green, anything that's really colorful, so spinach, broccoli, kale, great, the obvious things. But then you've got things like pumpkin, sweet potato, that are really dense in that stuff as well. Things like, breads are probably going to be lower in potassium. So it's having, and sometimes I like to give people systems rather than rules. So across the week, can you get 30 different plant varieties into your diet a week? And just think colors, like can you get different colors like squash, pumpkin, potato, beetroots, all these different colors? You're going to get more micronutrients, better for your gut bacteria, but more certainly you're going to be hitting those numbers without having to use MyFitnessPal and track it all the time.
So you get them to start out when they've got all the motivation, all the energy to do stuff, you get them to try and learn through an element of calorie counting, but it's not for the normal purpose. It's more just to get them to understand roughly what energies in different foods. And then you're giving them this kind of longer term strategy that's quite easy to implement for most people of just saying, get different plants, make sure they're different colors. Don't worry exactly which ones, just lots of variety. And that's actually a common theme. I think a few people have now mentioned this on this podcast. So we didn't prime that. We didn't line that up. It's just good to hear that, many people at the top of their game are starting to advise very similar things. So there's got to be something in that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I don't like too many like strict, stringent rules because they're hard to maintain. And the bedrock of people getting to where they want to get is they want to maintain it. It's not a crash course, ultimate performance, 10, 12 week approach. They have to be able to continue these approaches. So if I said have 35 grams of fiber and 3,000 milligrams of potassium, like how do I do that? How does that even look?
You're almost like bamboozling them with
bamboozling
data.
them. Yeah, where it's just give me just 30 different plants, nuts, seeds, herbs across the week.
All counts.
And I bet without trying, you're going to be in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, there's this really interesting bit of data I heard from a podcast, I can't remember which one, where they said that in America, the biggest source of fiber in most people's diet is coffee.
Wild.
So they're eating such a low fiber diet.
Yeah.
That the only thing was coffee. Was, firstly, I didn't even know there was fiber in coffee, but secondly, they're just clearly such a deficit in plants. That's the only thing that they're getting it from.
Yeah. And the big thing is, it helps with digestion and it helps balance out blood sugar. I think those two, when you get those things right, it helps the big things. It helps the mood, it helps the energy, it helps the the concentration, the irritability all comes from these small choices.
Yeah.
So I think if you get those foundations right, you give people the keys to the door.
Sleep's one of the other factors that you seem to discuss a lot with your clients, and you mentioned it earlier on in the talk. What tools will you give someone around sleep?
Ultimately, it's looking at like what's their bedtime routine. What do you do before bed? Like what are you eating? Maybe how close to bed are they eating that food? Are they eating it and then going straight to bed? Sometimes try to distance that out a little bit. Caffeine consumption, the earlier in the day, the better. The other rule that I find works really well, I think you've probably heard it quoted quite a bit, but that waiting that 90 minutes after wake time tends to help, like use your own sort of natural cortisol rather than artificially creating it. And it helps energy last and have a natural sort of decline later in the day. It's all about environment at night, light exposure during the day. The more you can see natural light at the start and at the ends of the day, the better.
It's tough in the UK, isn't it, with the winters?
Totally. And, even just going on holidays, for infinite reasons, you probably sleep better, but the light exposure is certainly one because it's regulating that circadian rhythm significantly more, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the vitamin D is another part of it. And it was only a few years ago where I started taking vitamin D and realized how much better I felt. I was getting up quite a lot in the mornings for early work and not seeing much daylight.
Yeah.
And feeling pretty rubbish, and never been a morning person anyway, but when I started taking vitamin D, it was within a week or two, I could really feel that there was a difference. And now between the months of October and March, vitamin D supplement.
Habitual, just take it, right?
Yeah, it just seems to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think with regards to vitamin D, there's almost no disease that doesn't correlate to low vitamin D status. Everything has that correlation. And back to just touching on sleep, if the lifestyle stuff is always the bedrock, the nutrition and the lifestyle stuff, but I do also think that there's nothing wrong with using supplements for sleep, because the better we sleep, the better the rest of the day is going to be, right? So I'm a big fan of magnesium prior to bed. And then if sometimes people struggle with like switching their brain off, I might recommend something like an L-theanine. It helps to calm down the brain waves. Or if they regularly wake up in the middle of the night, a GABA helps just again, calm those sort of brain waves down in the nighttime. So magnesium, GABA, or L-theanine are kind of the big additional sources that I might use as well.
See, we've covered now all the fundamentals I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there any other kind of fundamental parts to your lifestyle management?
I think they all tie in. I think, again, we are what we eat, or not necessarily what we eat. We are what we digest and absorb and assimilate. So from a digestion point of view, that has to be it's just a big question. Like, how often are they bloating? How often are they feeling gas or indigestion or reflux? That's just a key part of, I guess, the questionnaire front. So if that's all right, we will optimize that, because if you're absorbing food, then you're going to have the energy to utilize that food. So if that's the case, it might be using things like a zinc to heal up the gut. It might be using fish oil to reduce inflammation, or aloe vera, and then also a probiotic as well to build up good, healthy gut bacteria. It's a kind of a digestive approach that I use with clients as well.
And now you've got your health under control with your client, and ultimately, as you've said, you like to help 9-to-5ers feel like athletes. Moving into the performance sphere now, how do you get that going with your clients? How do you really shift them into high performance in an athletic perspective?
So from a training perspective, I like to lay out the week, and it starts by managing or optimizing energy output or energy systems that they're going to be using throughout the week, or intensity loads throughout the week. So example, a Monday and a Friday, opposite ends of the week, might be the maximum effort, maximum strength, higher neurological load sessions. the Tuesday and Thursday might be more of in that hypertrophy realm. So slightly lower CNS demand, but more of, I guess, muscle building, all those sort of things. But so the load comes down, we're working on a different strength quality. And then in the midst of the week, I'm a big fan of using cardio work and aerobic work to, again, bring the neurological load down, but to improve their work capacity and help flush out. The worst thing someone can do is train really heavy and then get on a plane and sit for 12 hours, because recovery needs blood flow. It needs fresh blood. So movement is your best friend. And so that can be low, let's call it zone 2 type work. That's the best thing to help like flush out waste products, lactic acid waste product, and improve, I guess, the mitochondria, which again is essentially in like helping you create energy. So I guess from a system point of view, it's managing energy and intensity loads across the week. Setting goals is also like a really big, simple part of that, right? I find I'm a big fan, and I find most of my clients can all do weighted pull-ups, because I think for whatever reason, people just get a real kick out of being able to do a weighted pull-up. It looks cool, it looks muscular, it looks strong. So taking people on little journeys like that, what are some strength targets? Is it 1.5 body weight squat or double body weight deadlift? Is it to be able to do just a weighted pull-up or a pull-up in general? I think they need they thrive off having these goals.
Yeah, I think so. I think that works really well. We've spoken now about some strength and power measurements. What kind of things do you measure aerobically? How do you do that with some of your clients?
Typically, I will use, so if they're runners, it will be like, let's use like a 5 kilometer as like a baseline
Time trial.
Time trial.
Yeah.
I think that works like really simply, really well. I quite like using, for people that aren't into running, a 3-minute aerobic test, sort of at the upper end of that, let's call it like aerobic power zone before it becomes real true endurance work. So a 3-minute sort of aerobic power test, maybe on a watt bike, just gives you a really good metric of, and I like to use watts as a key metric for that, distance and watts. Watts is fantastic because it tells you how much power someone's exerting, but you can use that to show someone how much power they're exerting per kilo of body weight. You know, really cyclists use watts per kilos all the time as a measurement of how efficient or how powerful they are. I find if someone can, let's say over a 3-minute ride, they can hold an average of 300 watts on the watt bike, and they were 85 kilos, but now they're 78 kilos, but they're holding the same power output. They're clearly way more efficient, they're stronger, they're more powerful. So again, it just provides more data. Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of using calories as a metric, because I don't like the way it's focusing on, it's something that I'm trying to lose. I like to focus on performance and achieving and always trying to exceed, your previous best. I like to use heart rate recovery as well as a bit of a barometer for fitness. Is not just how far or how fast, it's also like how well you recover from that effort. I think that's really indicative of how fit someone is. So using heart rate recovery is a bit of a baseline. So that would be doing your effort, sort of hitting a peak sort of heart rate for that interval, and then 60 seconds post that, how much has your heart rate actually dropped? If you look at the research, there's slightly different markers, but roughly speaking, you'll see anything below 12 beats per minute would be like a poor score. Anything below 25 is average, and then up from 25 to 50 is like, it's good. Anything above 50 beats per minute, like excellent, like elite.
You can get these on even. My wife's been playing around with an Apple Watch, and you can get this data just by looking at that section. Just go into into what it kicks out automatically. You don't have to necessarily measure that consciously. So you'd be able to find that stuff out. Most people, if they've got some kind of
super simple to do, right? There's nothing, it's no real challenge to do it. And I was reading some research on it as well, and it's also a huge predictor of health and longevity as well, regardless if you have heart disease, metabolic conditions, diabetes, regardless if you do or don't have it, it's still a big predictor of health and longevity. So
other independent one, a bit like grip strength. There seems to be, all right, I didn't know that actually. That's really good to know.
Yeah. So super simple, great, easy one to do, right? Recently I've done a VO2 max test as well, and I've started to encourage clients to do that. Again, that's got a good correlation to health and longevity. So the higher we can kind of get that in our 20s, 30s and 40s, we know through age and muscle deterioration, those numbers are going to decline. So the higher those numbers are, the better you are at sort of fighting against metabolic conditions, diseases.
What would be a good score for VO2 max?
So above 50 is like you're in the top sort of like sort of 5 to 10% of the population. So like a really good score. 40s to 50s again, pretty good. Sort of in those 30s, you know, it's something you particularly if you're below 35, it's something you should be working on, because at the end of the day, that number's only going to get worse.
And you look like a strength athlete. If I'm looking at you, you look like a strength athlete. What was your cardiovascular fitness when you did the VO2 max? What did it come out as?
56.8, I think.
So there you go. Like even though you look like a strength athlete, you've got excellent cardiovascular performance alongside that. How do you maintain that personally? How do you intertwine your own training to ensure that you're getting just the right amount of cardiovascular with the strength as well?
Yeah. Again, this was something that I've worked. I think one of my big realization points was that I was always really fit as a kid, rugby and all those sort of things. I was always the fittest, give or take. And then I found strength sports. I found powerlifting, strongman. I really immersed into that world. And I remember doing some sort of fitness event with my colleagues, and I got smoked. I got gassed, and I just like felt embarrassed. I felt really embarrassed. That's something I've always been good at, and I guess I was like, I don't ever want to feel like that again. It was like a real deep kind of,
especially with someone like yourself who's supposed to win all the time.
Yeah, I hated it. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then I, again, when I sort of learnt things from, again, Joel Jamieson, who I've referenced, I kind of learnt how to like tweak, I guess, the week. The week, as I explained it, I like to start with my strength work. I break up the middle of the week with an aerobic, a longer, maybe a zone 2 type work. And then on the weekends, I love to do like a higher intensity interval session as well. So I'm locking in that I'm doing 2 cardio sessions a week, whether that is running or kind of erg style intervals.
Yeah, nice. And have you immersed yourself into the kind of lactate threshold type testing, that world as well? Do you see much?
That's on the to-do list with Fletch coming up soon.
Yeah, so we had a whole podcast with him actually. So lots of information to be gained by listening to that one. And if you we'll add a story for you to then give your thoughts on how your VO2 max testing and how it changed your thinking when you then did the lactate threshold. Perhaps maybe we'll get a little bit of that later on down the line. Well, look, this has been really well rounded and is one of the most holistic conversations I've had, and I think it gives the weekend warrior a lot of things to take away and things that people can really learn and apply into their own lives. We'll finish on a couple of bits with more related to you. So Better Never Ends, the name of the podcast. What does that mean to you? What does Better Never Ends mean in your life?
I think, we touched on this earlier, is that, we repeat lots of our daily routines and our patterns, and and it's when we see growth, I think we're happy. I think we ultimately feel fulfilled when we know that as a human, as our soul, as our being, that we're continually growing and learning. So I think there's real deep happiness and satisfaction from that.
And that growth and learning, what things do you've referenced quite a few people already, but are there any other resources that you tend to gravitate towards, or some really influential things that you've come across in the last couple of years that have really sparked that growth in your own life?
Yeah, I think ever so slightly more now. I like to, I like to look at, listen to psychology kind of either podcast or you spot things on Instagram. So I think from that perspective, it's self-development. I'm a big believer in. There's a guy, Kerwin Ray, that I follow lots of his stuff, and I've done some of his courses, and I think that was where it really shifted my mindset on the value of your herd and how they can create limiting beliefs and hold you back from either financial success or personal success in sport or changing your life. I think that was a big mental shift to open up my world. From a training point of view, the thing that the people I've always kind of looked to was the Charles Poliquins of the world, the Joe DeFrancos of the world, Joel Jamieson. They're kind of three big key kind of figures that have taught me a lot about, I guess, the industry.
And Dan, if someone wants to see you as one of those figureheads, how do they find you and start to look at your stuff?
Yeah, so I guess the two reference points, Dan O'Neill with an _ on Instagram, or DanO'NeillCoaching.com as well, be the website point.
Okay, thanks very much for coming in today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health, wellness and performance services based in central London. You can book in for face-to-face services at either of our 2 clinics, one in Soho and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com. And of course, if you want to send us an email with any feedback, questions or suggestions for future episodes, then email us on podcast@betterneverends.com. And finally, thanks to Brian Long for editing the show. Without him, it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that these would never have seen the light of day. And it will allow this podcast to continue on for as long as I'll keep recording them. So thanks very much, Brian.